Hello, and thank you for tuning into my presentation about the theory of planned behavior. I am Nadine Mumford, and I will be discussing the history and development of the theory of planned behavior. I will then dive into a couple of interventions that successfully used the theory and targeted specific components to establish behavior change within a population. From there, we'll discuss the pros and cons of each study and finally take a look at some of the gaps within the theory of planned behavior. To begin, we cannot discuss the theory of planned behavior without first discussing the theory of reasoned action. The theory of planned behavior is ultimately an extension of the theory of reasoned action, which was established in 1975 by Martin Fishbein and Isaac Ashton. To trace the theory back just a little further, the theory of reasoned action was really an extension of the information integration theory, which relies on algebraic models to essentially describe how a person pulls information from the various sources in their life and how that individual makes an overall judgment call of a particular behavior. The theory of reasoned action essentially supports the idea behind the information integration theory by saying, yes, people do pull information from many areas and evaluate the outcome of what a particular behavior would bring for them. The theory of reasoned action names two specific areas that humans pull information from in order to develop their behavioral intention. Their attitude toward a behavior, which is the sum of the beliefs that an individual has about a particular behavior. In other words, an evaluation of the potential outcomes. And then second, the subjective norms around the behavior, which means the influence of the important people within that individual's social environment. Subjective norms are the perceived approval or disapproval of the behavior in question by these important others in an individual's life. In a nutshell, the theory of reasoned action says that when a person's attitude and when a person's subjective norm are aligned, then the person is more likely to develop a behavioral intention to behave a certain way. Behavioral intention is defined as an individual's perceived likelihood of performing a particular behavior. When someone has developed a behavioral intention, their actual behavior is more likely to line up with that intention. The most groundbreaking aspect of the theory of reasoned action was this separation between a person's intention and their actual behavior. You can see in the image on the left how the theory of planned behavior is literally an extension of the theory of reasoned action. And the idea behind a person's behavioral intention influencing, but not necessarily predicting, actual human behavior. The theory of planned behavior also supports the theory of reasoned actions components like attitude and subjective norms. What the theory of planned behavior adds to the theory of reasoned action is perceived behavioral control, which is an individual's perception of the resources and opportunities that the behavior requires and how accessible a person perceives those resources to be. To pull in an example, we can consider the behavior of running for exercise. A person's attitude toward running may be positive because they know that running may help them lose weight or help them become a healthier person. The subjective norms toward running may also be positive because the person's mother may be a big runner and maybe their sibling has been concerned about their recent weight gain and their health. Running would appease both of these people and be approved by both of these important people in this person's life. Finally, someone's perceived behavioral control toward running could also be positive because they may not see the reason to buy any running equipment or a gym membership. There may be a local walking trail right by this individual's apartment. Maybe they know an app they can download that will clock their running distance and their time for free. In this case, the person has the perception that they have all the resources they need in order to start successfully running. Because all three of these components align positively with the exercise behavior of running, this person is likely to develop a positive behavioral intention toward running, and therefore, this person is more likely to begin running on a regular basis. And this is how the theory of planned behavior essentially works. To take a look at the theory of planned behavior just one step further, we're going to look at the components that make up each construct of the theory of planned behavior. So a person's attitude is made up of their behavioral beliefs and their evaluation of behavioral outcomes. Their behavioral beliefs are the subjective probability that a behavior will produce any given outcome. The evaluation of behavioral outcomes is the value attached to a behavioral outcome. Basically, whether the outcome is good or bad and how much that individual wants that outcome. A person's subjective norm is made up of their normative beliefs and their motivation to comply. The normative beliefs are a person's beliefs about whether important others think that they should or should not participate in a particular behavior. Their motivation to comply is the extent to which this individual is motivated to adhere to these people's perceived opinions. In short, how much do their perceptions of what their important others think influence them? Finally, a person's perceived behavioral control consists of their control beliefs and their perceived power. Control beliefs are the factors that an individual perceives as impeding or facilitating the behavior. This could be how the individual sees a walking trail right by their apartment. This could be perceived as facilitating the behavior of running. And their perceived power is the person's behavioral control over the factors that impact behavior performance. In the case of running, the trail is right next door. So maybe they perceive this factor as in their control because they just need to walk outside their house. I have designed an infographic that encompasses all the components that make up a person's behavioral intention. Here you can see that subjective norms, attitude, and perceived behavioral control are all connected directly to behavioral intention right here in the center. The secondary components, like normative beliefs and motivation to comply, are connected but not directly to behavioral intention. They are connected specifically to subjective norms. Because these components have a direct influence on subjective norms, but only a secondary effect on the behavioral intention, we see the same with perceived behavioral control and attitude. The first case study we're going to look at is a breast cancer screening intervention. The intervention targeted African American females over the age of 40 who had never been diagnosed with breast cancer before. All the participants were from low-income neighborhoods in St. Louis, Missouri, and were able to read at least the 5th grade level. The goal was to look at the effect of narrative communication on the audience's attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control toward breast cancer screening, and ultimately increase breast cancer screening in the area. Women were assigned to 2 different groups. One group watched a video of African American breast cancer survivors, and the other group watched a content equivalent informational video. Researchers used interviews before the participants watched the video, immediately after, 3 months after, and then 6 months after in order to measure the results. The women who watched the narrative videos had more positive attitudes and subjective norms toward breast cancer and reported fewer perceived barriers to breast cancer screenings. Some of the benefits of this particular study is that it looked at the longitudinal effects of the intervention. With interviews, it followed women for almost a year, measuring their attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. It also looked at hospital records to see how many women actually followed through with breast cancer screenings. Another benefit is that it is a fairly inexpensive intervention. After the videos are created, it's more about the interview responses. The biggest cost is the expense of the video creation. Some of the limitations of this intervention are that within the narrative video group, the women are shown different videos and told different survivor stories. Certain videos or stories may be stronger than others, but results are a reflection of a mixed bag of stories and narrative styles. Because most longitudinal breast cancer research has been done on well-educated white women, there was less background information to work with for this target population in regards to breast cancer. While it is great to see a more diverse study, since breast cancer affects everyone, the background info to prepare the intervention was limited, which could have impacted the way the intervention was designed. Last but not least, study participants already had a higher than average mammography adherence rate. Participants were at about a 74% adherence rate, while the national average is only 68%. The second case study is on fruit and vegetable consumption intervention. The intervention targeted first-year psychology students at Australian University. The goal was to increase fruit and vegetable consumption as well as to increase perceived behavioral control, subjective norms, and attitudes toward consuming fruits and vegetables. Intervention participants were randomly assigned to either low-frequency or high-frequency intervention groups. Participants would receive theory of planned behavior-based emails that targeted the reader's attitudes, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control. The intervention used self-reports of fruit and vegetable consumption both before and after the intervention, as well as surveys to measure the theoretical components, attitude, subjective norms, and behavioral intention. In both groups, fruit and vegetable consumption increased by nearly 1 fruit and veggie serving per day, and theoretical constructs toward fruit and vegetable consumption also increased. Some of the benefits of this fruit and vegetable consumption intervention are that it maximized statistical power with the pre- and post-study design. Numbers and statistics are moving to people, and this intervention had numerical values for each theoretical component. This was another inexpensive intervention. The most expensive or time-consuming part of the intervention would be the development of the theory-based emails. Some of the limitations of this study are that the consumption data relied exclusively on self-reports, and we know that people may report higher levels of fruit and vegetable consumption than their actual behavior supports in order to look better. There was no follow-up after the initial post-intervention reports, so there is no way to know if the effects are long-lasting or not. Then there was also no control group. We were not able to compare the results to a group of our target population that did not receive any emails. The university may have increased availability to fruits and vegetables over summer, or maybe people were more interested in eating fruits and vegetables that time of year. There is no way to prove that the increase in fruit and vegetable consumption is from this campaign. Finally, the target audience was so specific, rooted in a specific major at a specific school, and particularly first-year students. While college-age students are a good population to look at since they undereat fruits and vegetables, this intervention was targeted so specifically, which makes it less generalizable. Finally, we will discuss some of the gaps within the theory of planned behavior. While a strong theory, there are some recurring issues with it. The theory does not consider socioeconomic or environmental factors. While normative beliefs are certainly influenced by these things, their theory itself does not address the outside environment of the individual. Next, the theory separates and puts space between behavioral intention, which is great, because oftentimes what we intend to do is not what we do. However, the theory does not specify the time between the development of the behavioral intention and when we can expect the behavior to be performed. When someone develops the intention to start running, when can we expect to see that person out there running? Within the day? Within the week? If they haven't started running by the end of the month, is the intention simply not predictive of the behavior in this case? Finally, the theory of planned behavior does not consider habit strength. When an individual is in the habit of drinking a couple beers right after work, it means that the behavior of opening a beer has been performed on a recurring basis, and there is an element of uncontrollability, or at the very least, a lack of awareness of the performance of this action. Habits with high strength are very difficult to break, and it should really be a factor in the theory of planned behavior, and hopefully it will be considered in the future. If When someone gets home from work, they open a beer first, they are probably not going to fulfill their intention of going for a run.